Just hours after surviving a heart attack at 10 o'clock at night and still lying in the ICU with unsteady breaths, before I could even recover half my strength. At exactly 1:14 in the morning, my phone vibrated, and Chloe's voice, the girl I raised alone for 17 years, came through the line, cold enough to slice into my still aching chest. "Dad, I'm calling so you won't be surprised. Tomorrow I'm getting married. Don't come. I sold the condo you bought, sold the car you gave me. Adrian and I are starting our new life. Don't interfere." In the hospital room, only the monitor kept beeping steadily. I lay there, a father who had just been pulled back from the brink of death, being humiliated by his own daughter, with words I didn't think could ever come from her mouth. If you've ever been hurt by the person you love most, hurt by a sentence sharper than any wound on your body, you'll understand how cold I was that night. Leave a single and tell me where you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe so these stories can reach the people who need them most. The air in the ICU of Denver Presbyterian Hospital was so cold that my breath turned into thin layers of frost against my lips. The smell of antiseptic, the harsh white lights, and the steady beep of the monitor all blended into a silence that made it feel as if the world outside had completely shut down. But right in that frozen moment, the phone on the metal table to my right suddenly buzzed, a sharp vibration in the middle of the night, jerking my upper body upright. Pain stabbed through my sternum like a needle twisting into soft flesh after the myocardial infarction I'd just survived. I turned toward the screen. 1:14 a.m. The caller ID cut across me like a blade. "Chloe!" I reached for it. The IV line strained with every movement. My chest tightened once. I picked up. Her voice came through, not the warm tone I used to know, but something cold, clipped, like she had rehearsed every word. "Dad, I'm calling so you won't be surprised. Tomorrow I'm getting married at Silverhaven Chapel, and Adrian and I sold the condo, sold the Tesla, too." Then she exhaled, a dry, metallic sound. "Don't interfere anymore. Adrian is right. You only control me and drag me down. I don't want to live like that." In the pause between her sentences, I heard someone breathing behind her, a quick, guarded breath that didn't belong to Chloe. A chill ran down my spine. For a few seconds, every sound in the room vanished. Only her voice kept cutting. The $580,000 condo I put into a trust to protect her for life. The Tesla I gave her when she signed her first teaching contract. All gone, while I was lying here with a heart freshly sutured. I leaned back against the pillow, steadying my breath. 30 years as a forensic accountant taught me this. When someone hits you where it hurts most, be the quiet one first. I spoke slowly, each word clear, like reading a line from an investigation report. "Chloe, you're forgetting something important." She stopped. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear blood pounding in my ears. "What do you mean?" Her voice shifted, defensive, irritated, a tone I knew I didn't create. Then she added, sharp as a needle, "Adrian says, you never let me go. You suffocate me. I don't want to become like Mom, a woman controlled by you her whole life." I stared up at the hospital ceiling, letting the silence split between us like a fault line. I didn't answer right away. Sometimes you stay silent so the other person can hear the truth, waiting at the end of the conversation. On the table beside my bed, my personal bag was still open. Under the sterile lights, the Mercer Family Trust folder lay neatly inside. The edge of the paper was worn, a mark from the dozens of times I'd checked it over the years, preparing for a day I hoped would never come. Right next to it was Linda's framed photo. My wife has been gone 17 years now. In the hospital light, her face softened. The same gentle smile she wore the morning before the CT scan changed everything. I closed my eyes. In that thin darkness, I heard her last whisper, "Evan, if one day she goes the wrong way, don't abandon her. Even if she blames you, protect her." I opened my eyes. The tight ache in my chest faded, replaced by the cold clarity known only to people used to exposing fraud and psychological manipulation. I picked up the phone again. My voice settled into the rhythm of my heartbeat. When you get back to Boulder, tell Adrian to be ready, because someone will knock on the door. Chloe froze. I could almost hear her breathing quicken. Are you threatening me? I exhaled softly, and the smile on my face wasn't for her question. It was for the thing Adrian Cole never expected. He didn't just touch money. He touched a legal structure built by me, the only person who holds every key to it. I answered lightly, almost like a bedtime wish. By tomorrow, you'll understand. I hung up. The ICU returned to its original quiet, but it wasn't the quiet of a man struggling to survive. It was the calm of someone who knows every move the enemy will make. I looked again at the Mercer Family Trust. That folder wasn't just paperwork, it was the final net I built for my daughter, a net I knew would tighten at exactly the right moment. Then I laughed, a small sound, no louder than a breath, but sharp as a blade. The laugh of someone who has uncovered hundreds of schemes by men who think they're smarter than they are. The laugh of a father betrayed, but still holding a card the other side doesn't know exists. Adrian Cole thinks he got the money, thinks he severed my bond with Chloe, thinks a forged signature can fool a system. He forgot one thing. The man lying in the ICU tonight isn't a victim. He's a forensic accountant who has seen men like him his entire life. I close my eyes, letting the monitor beep steadily. Tomorrow will be the day he starts to fall, and I will be the one watching his entire descent from beginning to end. The morning after the midnight call, I lay still on the hospital bed, trying to keep my breathing steady to ease the pressure on the part of my chest that still throbbed. Even though the doctor had ordered absolute rest, my mind couldn't stop wandering back through the years that had brought me to this exact moment. A moment where my heart didn't ache because of illness, but because of something sharper than any needle. Memory. 17 years. A stretch of time long enough to change the structure of an entire life. 17 years raising a child, alone after the only partner I ever had was taken by pancreatic cancer. A sickness that came like a toxic wind and swept Linda from my hands in just 4 months. 4 months, where every day felt like another farewell. I still remember the last day. Chloe was 10 then, her hair tied crookedly to one side, her eyes wide and frightened, as she watched her mother become so thin, the hands that once held her every night now looked like autumn leaves. Linda lay in the hospital bed, her breathing as faint as a thread. I bent down and held her hand, cold and light, to the point where I feared squeezing any harder would shatter it into 100 pieces. She looked at me, exhausted but still trying to keep that familiar smile, the smile that made even the worst days less brutal. Evan, don't let our girl be left alone. That was the sentence that followed me for the next 17 years, like a compass, like a burden, like a vow. After Linda died, I had to be both father and mother. On the mornings Chloe brushed her hair wrong, I learned to brush it for her, clumsy but persistent. On afternoons when math made her cry, I sat beside her until she understood. On nights she dreamed of Linda lying in the hospital. I held her tight until her sobs faded into steady breaths. Our little house in Lakewood had only 2 people, me and Chloe, the sound of utensils clinking in the small kitchen, the scratch of her pencil in the corner of the living room, the low hum of my keyboard as I worked on forensic audits from the time she fell asleep until 3 in the morning. People think forensic accounting is just rows of lifeless numbers, but for me, it was the only way to raise my daughter without abandoning her future. Every night, when the neighborhood had gone dark, I sat under the warm yellow desk lamp, turning through bank statements, matching numbers, spotting the tiniest traces of financial fraud for the companies that hired me. Sometimes I worked until my hands trembled and my eyes burned from staying open, But whenever I looked over at the small bed where Chloe slept, curled under her pale blue blanket, the exhaustion felt worth it. There was one thing, tied tightly to Chloe's childhood, the maple desk. I built it myself in the garage, planning, assembling, and varnishing it over 6 nights. On its surface were scratches from her spills of colored pencils, a tiny burn mark the size of a coin from the time she tried to light a scented candle. A long streak I knew came from her pulling the spaghetti plate too hard while learning to eat on her own. That desk was where she chirped about her first day of 6th grade. That was where I placed Linda's picture at every dinner. And it was at that very desk that Chloe once said a sentence that made me turn away to hide the tear in my eye. That desk witnessed me turning from a widower into a father, determined not to let his child lose anything else. When Chloe turned 22, I was finally able to buy her first home, a small but bright condo in Boulder facing the Flatirons. Price, $580,000, held in the Mercer Family Trust to protect her for life in case she made a mistake, or in case someone unworthy walked into her life. The day I handed her the key, she froze at the doorway, eyes wide, blinking as if she couldn't believe the place belonged to her. She turned and hugged me, small arms wrapped tight. "Dad, this is my home because of your heart." I remember every syllable, every breath of that moment, and I remember the way she looked around the empty sunlit space as she had stepped into a dream. She never dared dream too big. I believed Linda would have smiled if she had seen that moment, and I thought I had secured Chloe's future against any hand that might try to take it. Now, lying in a hospital bed, I saw everything again. The nights I worked until dawn, the cold Colorado mornings drove her to school, the winters we wrapped in blankets, watching movies beside the old maple desk, the long drive to show her the first condo of her life. The first texts she sent were from her college dorm. Every milestone, every detail, every innocent sentence from the child I devoted my entire life to protecting. And then, the call at 1:14 a.m., the unfamiliar voice of the girl I raised, the announcement, sold the condo, sold the Tesla, getting married tomorrow. I placed my hand over my eyes, letting my breath fall slowly, not because I was weak, but because everything I had guarded for 17 years could tremble just because a man named Adrian E. Cole stepped close. Linda once said, "Evan, don't let anyone steal our daughter's heart." Her voice seemed to echo across time, touching the fresh wound in my chest. And in that moment, I understood one thing. I didn't just have to save Chloe from Adrian. I had to keep my final promise to Linda. Before my heart stopped beating in that ICU room, there had been an evening at the Timberline Grill that I later understood was the first moment Adrian Cole exposed himself. The Timberline Grill was more crowded than usual that night. The amber light spilling over the walnut tables gave the whole place a kind of artificial warmth, the kind of warmth people stop by for when they want to hear what comforts them, not what's true. I chose the table near the window, where I could see the length of the 16th Street Mall outside. A habit of the job, always choose the widest field of observation. Chloe walked in first, wine-colored dress, slightly tense eyes, her fingers gripping the strap of her purse as if holding on to a fragile belief. But the person who changed the temperature of the room was the man walking behind her, Adrian Cole. He entered with the posture of someone convinced he should be noticed. A dark gray Italian-cut suit fitted to his frame, the steel glint of a Rolex Datejust on his left wrist. The restaurant lights caught the watch face as if conspiring to display every detail. Chloe introduced us. "Dad, this is Adrian." I stood and offered my hand. He squeezed mine a little longer than courtesy allowed. Smart men use handshakes to read people. Dangerous men use them to test dominance. He leaned in and smirked, speaking just low enough for only me to hear. "Hope you keep calm tonight. Chloe says you worry too much." In that exact moment, a cold line ran down my spine. This was the man who had turned my daughter's voice into that emotionless tone during the 1 to 2 a.m. call. We sat. The server brought menus, but Adrian didn't open his. He tilted his head toward Chloe and smiled the kind of smile people practice in mirrors. "Let me order for you." Their surf and turf is amazing. I straightened in my seat, not from jealousy, but from the way he made decisions for her, on the very first night meeting me, which felt wrong in a way only a long-trained instinct detects. Chloe glanced at me, her eyes carrying both irritation and worry, then whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Dad, stop scrutinizing Adrian." When the orders were placed, I noticed the first red flag. As Adrian took off his coat, his car key slipped from his pocket, and I saw instantly that it was a key to a BMW 7 Series. I had watched him drive up in it. A 7 Series isn't for someone newly stable in life. It's for someone extremely wealthy or extremely reckless. His voice cut through the table. Denver traffic was awful. Drove from Cherry Creek and got stuck for almost half an hour. Cherry Creek is the wealthiest neighborhood in the city. Another imbalance. The server set a bottle of Cabernet on the table. Adrian flipped the wine menu lazily for a few seconds, then said, "This one's fine, but Mercer, I hope you don't mind choosing the wine." His tone was soft but coercive, like someone placing a pillow over your face and calling it kindness. I understood immediately. He expected me to pay. I smiled and asked the server to bring the best bottle within their premium tier. Not to show off, only to see how Adrian would react when control shifted. Forensic accountants don't just read numbers, they read people. He glanced at the price on the bill when the server set the wine down, and I watched his neck muscles tighten. In less than 10 minutes, he began monologuing about finance. The market is actually great right now for people who understand equity. I'm tracking some interesting opportunities. I didn't challenge him, but listening for 3 minutes was enough to recognize he didn't understand equity in any technical sense. He used the word the way financial predators use it, to cover a gaping lack of real foundation. Their language is always the same. Big words stretched over bigger emptiness. When the salads arrived, Adrian turned to me. "Chloe told me you bought her the Boulder condo. That location has prime resale value. If I had it, I'd sell immediately to free up capital." The sentence hit straight at the heart. That condo was the last fortress I built to safeguard Chloe's life. It wasn't a tool for flipping capital. It held my heart, my memories of Linda, and the 17-year promise I'd lived inside. Chloe looked at me, lips pressed into a small line, then murmured, "Dad, don't overcomplicate things. Adrian's just being practical." He looked at the condo like a wolf looks at meat. I looked at him like an investigator looks at a suspect who has just slipped. When Adrian reached for the wine, the light caught his hand. I saw a faint indentation on his ring finger, a mark only left by a long-worn wedding band. Not engagement, not a casual relationship, a marriage recently ended. Men who flee a divorce and sprint into a new relationship always carry the scent of bankruptcy, financial or emotional, often both. I linked all 5 signals. They formed a picture so complete it chilled me. Chloe leaned into him, her eyes searching for my approval, and I saw her as the 7-year-old asking, "Dad, can I trust this person?" Except now she didn't ask, because she believed she no longer needed to. Adrian leaned forward, elbow on the table, his smile small but carrying a blade. "Chloe deserves to be led by a man who understands finance better. Don't you think so, Mr. Mercer?" He dragged the last word, "better," as a deliberate cut, a polite insult, a declaration that he believed my role was over. My voice is gone. My authority is irrelevant. Chloe leaned toward him, her voice soft but piercing. "Dad, don't make this awkward." I set my fork down with a quiet click. I looked him directly in the eyes. Then I smiled, a smile forensic accountants know well, the smile of someone who has already seen the entire game from the moment the first piece touched the board. A a smile that makes the other man wonder, what did I just miss? I didn't answer him, because he had just stepped into a battlefield he didn't know existed, the battlefield of real numbers, real assets, and a father who had never lost a single investigation. The morning I was discharged, Denver was so cold, the smell of oxygen still clung to my chest. The nurse told me to rest for at least a week, avoid stress, and avoid exertion, but I only nodded out of politeness. There are moments in life when a person simply cannot lie still, and this was one of them. The car drove slowly through rows of bare trees, the winter sunlight thin as paper, touching my face but not warm enough to linger. The small house where Chloe and I had lived for 17 years sat silent, exactly as it had been when I left for the ICU. I opened the door and stepped inside, and the first thing that hit me was a silence so heavy it felt as if the house had been waiting for me to return just to witness something that had been off track for a long time. I hung my coat over the chair and went straight to my office. The maple desk, the scanner, the small safe, and the Mercer Family Trust file were all exactly where I had left them. But this time, I opened it with the mindset of a forensic accountant who no longer had even a shadow of emotional hesitation. In the third stack of documents, I found a POA I had never signed. The signature Evan Mercer at the bottom was sharp, smooth, without the natural tremor my real signature has had ever since my mild arthritis 5 years ago. To the untrained eye, it looked perfect, but I'd spent 3 decades analyzing fraud, studying hand pressure, ink flow, and stroke rhythm. This was not my signature. It had been generated using handwriting simulation software, the type scammers buy on private forums, capable of stitching together strokes from existing documents to create a signature more real than real. Looking at that POA, I knew one thing for certain. Adrian wasn't just a bad man. He was prepared. From the hospital, Chloe said, "The condo is already sold." But I knew any asset inside the Mercer Family Trust required the trustee's signature, mine. Without the real signature, the transaction could not be completed. I opened my laptop and logged into the escrow account. A notice flashed in the center of the screen. Status: release pending title clearance. I leaned back and exhaled slowly. That meant no keys handed over, no full wire sent, no closing. Escrow was waiting for the title company to verify everything, and they hadn't received verification. They hadn't because they were suspicious of the signature, and when escrow is suspicious, they never hit close. Meaning, the condo still belonged to the trust. Adrian hadn't gotten a single cent. I enlarged the signature on the POA, analyzing the loops, the slant. Every detail confirmed that someone had copied my 2019 signature from an old contract and rebuilt it with software. He knew I had heart issues. He knew I might not be fully alert. He thought I wouldn't notice. I touched the corner of Linda's picture frame. Her gentle smile felt like a needle pushing deeper into my resolve. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't had to call in 10 years. Grant Holloway. Former FBI agent, the man who led 3 major cases I assisted on, a quiet, hard man with an uncanny ability to smell fraud from miles away. The phone rang 4 times. Then his low, gravelly voice came through. "Evan, haven't heard you sound like this in a long time." I drew a breath, steadying my tone so it didn't sound like a man just released from the ICU. "Grant, I need you. Immediately." "Bad enough for you to call me this early?" "Worse than I thought. My future son-in-law forged a POA, attempted to sell trust property, and shows signs of financial fraud." I heard the scrape of a chair. He was sitting up. "Name?" "Adrian Cole." "You have documents?" "I have everything, and I need you to analyze the signature source, the impersonation pattern, the escrow trail, and any prior fraud connected to him." Grant went silent for a few seconds, but it wasn't hesitation. It was the silence of a man switching on his investigative machinery. "I'll be in Lakewood in 3 hours." I nodded even though he couldn't see. "Grant, Yeah? My daughter is being manipulated by him. He answered without a beat. Then we pull her out of that trap. I hung up and set the phone on the desk, then reopened the Mercer family trust file. Every page, every annotation, every expense for Chloe over 17 years, each one a precise piece of a life I had built to protect a single child. I knew I was no longer talking to Adrian with emotion. I was speaking in law, in logic, in evidence, and in the cold certainty of a man who has lost too much to lose anything else. When I closed the file, sunlight slanted through the window and lit up the page where Chloe Mercer's name sat. This was no longer the story of a wounded father. This was a legal war I was obligated to win, because I had promised Linda, and because my daughter needed saving from the man trying to strip her life down to the last dollar. And the truth was simple. Adrian Cole had triggered the wrong man, irreversibly. 10 days after the first phone call, Grant Holloway returned to my house with a file thick enough that its cover was nearly tearing apart. He dropped it onto the maple desk with a heavy thud, a sound that told me whatever lay inside would not be light. I poured 2 cups of coffee, but Grant didn't touch his. He simply pulled out a chair and looked straight at me with the eyes of a man who had spent a lifetime staring into the darkest corners of people. Evan, it's worse than we thought. I opened the file. On the first page, 2 bold words. Adrian Cole, pattern analysis. Grant tapped the tip of his pen on the table, his old habit whenever he was about to deliver bad news. I've spent 10 days investigating, across 6 states, 2 federal databases, and even sealed civil records. Actually, and here's what I found. He flipped the page. The first name appeared. Rachel Dawes. Losses. $40,000. Grant's voice was steady, almost prosecutorial. They met in 2017. 8 months later, Rachel wired money to Adrian for an investment. He disappeared the same day the largest transfer cleared. I stared at Rachel's photo. A woman in her 30s, beautiful smile, tired eyes. The kind of woman men like Adrian target. Independent but recently wounded. Grant turned to page 2. Melissa Pike lost her 2-bedroom condo. Marketing professional. He convinced her to open a joint-backed studio. She signed the mortgage. He drained the funds and walked. She lost everything. I closed my eyes briefly. Not because of the money, but because I recognized the pattern. 3 women, same script. Charm, acceleration, dependency, extraction, disappearance. Then page 3. Veronica Hale, restraining order, 2020. Her photo showed a woman standing outside a courthouse, clutching a file, hope hollowed out of her face. Grant explained, she filed a protective order after he stalked her when she asked for her money back. Case dismissed for lack of evidence. Adrian left the state 3 days later. I fit the pieces together faster than my heartbeat. 3 victims, 3 blueprints of the same crime. I looked at Grant. And the 4th? Grant opened the next section, adding documents from Arizona. A case never concluded in Scottsdale. A woman named Kara lost money to a business partner named Adrian C. She moved abroad before finishing the report. I set my pen down. 4 victims. Those we found, Grant emphasized. There could be more. He pulled out another sheet and slid it toward me. A credit card statement. The numbers bled red across the page. His credit card debt is $89,000. $89,000. My jaw tightened. Grant continued. Checking account, 212. Savings, almost 0. He flipped to the lease agreement. BMW 7 Series, 3-year lease. 3 payments behind. The dealership is prepping a repossession. Every detail painted the same portrait. A drowning man, and Chloe was his lifeline. Grant leaned in, voice low and sharp as a paper cutter. If he sells Chloe's condo, Evan, he'll disappear within 72 hours. I knew he was right. Once a man like Adrian touches the money, he vanishes. New state, new name, new victim, just like he did to Rachel, to Melissa, to Veronica, and maybe to Kara. I sat frozen, gripping the desk until my knuckles turned white. Grant softened his tone. You need to act. Fast. I nodded. I know. But just as he stood to leave, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I was about to ignore it, but something in my gut told me to pick up. A shaky but steady female voice came through. Mr. Mercer? Yes. Who is this? A brief silence. Then, this is Melissa Pike. I looked at Grant. He immediately returned to the table, motioning for speakerphone. Melissa's voice tightened, thick with pain and resolve. If your daughter is involved with Adrian, please let me help. The call ended, leaving behind a silence heavier than any revelation in the file. Grant slowly sat back down, his eyes sharp, as if a missing piece had just snapped perfectly into place. On the table, the file of 4 victims lay open, and now the voice of a 5th had entered the room. I said nothing. I simply locked my phone, stood up, and packed the entire file into my leather case. Some moments don't require discussion. They demand action. Chloe was in Boulder, beside a man who had already destroyed the lives of at least 3 women, and possibly more. And I knew the hardest part was coming. Not from Adrian, but from Chloe's own mouth. I drove to Boulder in the late afternoon, the sky heavy with thick gray clouds, so low it felt as if I could reach up and brush their edges with my fingertips. After 10 days of investigating with Grant, after files of victims, after every sign pointing to Adrian Cole being a professional fraud, I knew I had to talk to Chloe before the truth was twisted into a weapon against itself. I parked under the building where she was temporarily renting a studio. The hallway lights were still on, but her door was shut. I knocked 3 times. No answer. I raised my hand to knock again when the door suddenly opened and Chloe appeared. But her eyes, cold, tense, defensive, were nothing like any I had seen in the 17 years I raised her. I don't want to see you. Her voice was sharp, fractured with anger. I kept my tone even. Chloe, listen to me. There's something you need to know about Adrian. She let out a bitter laugh, a kind of laugh I had never heard from my daughter. I know everything already. Adrian told me you'd do this. I froze. Adrian had gotten ahead of me, Chloe continued. He said you have psychological issues since Mom died, that you're obsessed with control, that you always want to decide for everyone else, and that you don't want me to be happy. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. A man can survive physical pain, but hearing your own child repeat the words of a manipulator, accusing you of things you've never been guilty of, cuts deeper than any heart attack. Chloe, he's leading you. Adrian is not who you think he is. Her fingers tightened around her bag strap, her shoulders trembling in anger. Exactly. He said you'd say that. I didn't recognize her voice anymore. She continued, her tone sharp as shattering glass. He said you're imagining things, that you want to ruin us because you can't accept that I'm an adult, that you want control over everything, just like you controlled Mom. I froze. Those words, poisoned, jagged, scraped through my chest like metal against glass. Chloe, your mother was never controlled by me. But she wasn't listening. She shouted loud enough for the whole hallway to hear, I won't become another Linda, another woman you controlled. For a moment the air solidified. The sentence hit me like a hammer. Linda, who fought cancer with every breath she had. Linda, who held Chloe through every fear she ever had as a child. Linda, who never once accused me of anything but loving too deeply. Chloe had used her name like a blade. My heart tightened, not from illness, but from the realization that Adrian had done the worst thing a manipulator can do. He made his victim turn against the one who loved her most. I steadied my voice. I raised you for 17 years. Those words are not yours. But Chloe stepped back, hand on the door handle. I don't need you interfering. I'm old enough to make my own choices. Stop controlling everything. Then the door slammed in my face. The click of the lock was soft, but it felt like a verdict. I stood there for a moment, my hand still resting on the cold wood. I called her name. No answer. I called again. Still silence. The third time, my phone flashed. Blocked. I stared at the dark screen. No message, no hesitation, no room left for explanation. I turned and walked down the stairs, each step feeling like a descent into a deeper fracture. Not for me, but for what remained of our relationship. Rain began to fall as I reached the parking lot. The first drops hit my coat, cold, sharp, like every word she had hurled at me. The wind swept down from the flat irons, icy and carrying the scent of wet earth. I stood under the rain, clutching the trust file I had protected for 17 years like a sacred object. Paper-soaked, edges curling, but I held it tight, because it was the only thing left standing between my daughter and Adrian's hands. Rain streamed down my face, mixing with the tight breath in my throat. I stood alone in the Boulder parking lot, gripping the file as if letting go meant letting Chloe's entire life wash away with the storm. And in the hiss of wind tearing past my ears, I heard Linda's voice again, like a reminder from somewhere impossibly far. Don't let her be taught the wrong version of herself. I closed my eyes, then opened them. There was no room left for hurt, only the fight. Morning in Fort Collins had a thin, silk-like light draped over the red brick blocks, gentle, but with a cold undercurrent that made you instinctively pull your collar higher. I arrived at the small cafe on the corner of Mason Street at the exact time Melissa had set. She was seated in the back, her back to the window, the posture of someone who hadn't just lost a 2-bedroom condo and a relationship, but the last shard of pride a woman tries to hold on to after being deceived. When I approached the table, Melissa looked up, her eyes carrying the kind of exhaustion only people who've been drained of both trust and money can truly recognize. "Mr. Mercer?" "Yes." Melissa opened her bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers neatly held in a plastic folder. She slid it toward me, her voice calm to the point of being hollow. "This is his playbook." I opened it. The first pages outlined the exact steps Adrian used on his victims, how he spoke, the lines he repeated, the trust-building tactics, the timing of when money entered the conversation, annotations Melissa had written in red ink. Each section felt like a blade pressed into my palm, not because it surprised me, but because every detail mirrored what Chloe had gone through. Melissa spoke softly, as if recounting a crime scene. He uses one template, then swaps the name of the victim, swaps the backdrop. But the promises stay the same. The phrasing stays the same. The timeline stays the same. I scanned the list. On the third page, a line was circled in blue. Sever ties with family. Stage 3. I inhaled slowly. Chloe is exactly in that stage. Melissa nodded, her eyes reddening but her voice steady. All of us once stood exactly where your daughter is standing. That sentence weighed more than any evidence Grant had brought. Melissa let out a thin breath, her voice dropping halfway. When he left me, I thought I would get over it. But then I realized I kept watching him from afar. Back then I was too blind, and without proof, so I couldn't press charges, but I never forgot the feeling of having my life shredded by him. She tightened her grip on her bag strap, her gaze darkening. I saw him posting online, bragging that he'd found real love and was ready for a new chapter. When a man like him says that, I know for certain there's a plan behind it. Melissa looked at me, her voice low but precise. I started watching more closely. I traced your name backward from Chloe's comments, then looked up the Mercer Family Trust. That's when I understood. If you're the father of the woman in his photos, you're the only person who can blow up his entire plan. I closed the file gently, as if holding something fragile. Thank you. Melissa gave a small nod. If helping you stops this, then it's the piece of my life I get back from him. She paused, then added, There's one more person you need to meet. Rachel. He conned her before he conned me. No one understands the danger Adrian poses better than she does. I looked straight into Melissa's eyes. Can you take me to her? Melissa nodded. If you want to win, you need witnesses. I'll take you. We left the cafe and drove nearly 30 minutes to a quiet neighborhood in northern Fort Collins. Melissa led me up to a second-floor apartment, knocking 3 times. A woman opened the door, tall, beautiful, but with a shadowed face, marked by the kind of sorrow that comes from too many disappointments. Rachel Dawes looked at me with guarded suspicion. Melissa spoke quickly before she could ask, Rachel, this is Evan Mercer. His daughter is about to marry Adrian. Rachel froze, her hand tightening on the edge of the door. Just those 2 words, about to, made the vein in her temple twitch. We sat at the small wooden table in the living room. I laid everything out from the beginning. The trust, the condo, the forged POA, the BMW lease on the verge of repossession, the credit card debt, the escrow account about to release funds, the words my daughter screamed at me in the hallway in Boulder. I hid nothing. Rachel listened without missing a beat, her expression shifting from sympathy to anger. Not anger aimed at me, but at something she recognized all too well. When I reached the part where Adrian told Chloe I had psychological issues and wanted to control her life, Rachel pressed a hand over her mouth, as if hearing the echo of her own past. Those exact words. He used them on me to force me to cut ties with my brother. Melissa nodded sharply. He said the same thing to me, word for word. I opened the file Grant had put together and pointed out every identical milestone between the 3 victims. Rachel looked down, her hands trembling. Then she stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the empty courtyard, as if wrestling with something buried deep. After a long moment, she turned back, her eyes no longer those of someone wounded, but someone who had finally found a reason to rise. Mr. Mercer, Rachel said, her voice steady, I once thought I'd never be strong enough to tell this story to anyone. But if I stay silent, Chloe becomes me all over again. I won't let that happen. She pulled her chair closer, leaning forward. I'll testify. I'll sign whatever statement you need. I've stayed quiet for too long. Melissa placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement between women who had survived the same blade. The air in the apartment grew heavy but solid. Not the weight of tragedy, but the weight of truth. I spoke slowly, clearly. From this moment on, we're not 3 people who were fooled by the same man. We're an alliance. Adrian won't take all of us down again. By the time we stepped outside, the sun had dipped low, painting long orange streaks across the wooden stairs. Melissa, Rachel, and I stood by the parked cars without speaking, but it wasn't the silence of despair. It was preparation, the silence of people who understood that the real battle had just begun. Silver Haven Chapel, that night, glowed like a stage built to showcase nothing but blinding spectacle. Light washed over the white wooden arches, strings of fairy lights poured down the columns, and soft music drifted from speakers hidden inside the walls. The kind of setup meant for a lavish performance, rather than a real life. Outside, Chloe's friends clustered together, phones raised, some even live streaming. The atmosphere was so electric that anyone unaware of the truth would think this was the happiest moment of her life. Adrian stepped out from the left wing, wearing a tailored white suit, looking like a champagne commercial tycoon. He adjusted his cuffs, flashing the Rolex that didn't match a man drowning in nearly 6 figures of credit card debt. Chloe appeared minutes later, flowing gown, soft updo, flawless makeup. But the moment our eyes met at the chapel gate, her smile vanished in an instant. Dad, you're not allowed inside. Her voice was small but rigid, cold, as if the man in front of her wasn't the one who raised her for 17 years, but a stranger blocking the doorway. I stood outside the gate while light rain collected on my coat. The wedding security glanced at me apologetically, unwilling to interfere. I said nothing, just inhaled once, deeply. Inside my coat pocket, I carried things no wedding ever wants to see. The marriage records, the forged POA created with handwriting simulation software, The credit card statements showing nearly $90,000 in debt. The BMW Series 7 repossession notice. The email Adrian sent a friend about getting liquidity before the wedding, and the messages pressuring Chloe to sell the condo to free up capital. All of it legitimate, legal, irrefutable, organized neatly in a waterproof file. Not to ruin a wedding, but to save my daughter from a nightmare wrapped in white lace. I walked around the side of the chapel to the technical wing, separated from the guests. The glow of LED test screens cast blue light across the concrete. That's where I found the one person I needed. Caleb Jennings, the tech coordinator for 3 financial conferences where I'd been a speaker, and the man I once helped avoid a $40,000 equipment loss accusation back in 2019. When he turned and recognized me, shock and worry spread across his face. "Mr. Mercer? What? What are you doing here?" No small talk. "Caleb, I need you." I handed him a thin folder, not a USB, not some suspicious device, just printed documents and PDFs on an iPad, backed by verification from Grant Holloway. Caleb skimmed the first few pages, and his face drained of color. "Mr. Mercer? This is real?" "Real." He looked up, eyes heavy. "If you don't stop this, that girl's life is done." I nodded. Caleb tightened his grip on the folder. "I control the presentation system here. I can override the main screens if I detect a technical fault. Just give me the signal, and I'll put this up when everyone's watching." The blue LED glow carved sharp shadows across his face. He no longer looked like a tech guy. He looked like a witness stepping onto the battlefield. "Mr. Mercer," Caleb said slowly, "if this is to save someone, I'm with you." I placed a hand on his shoulder. Nothing more needed to be said. The storm was already at the chapel door. All that remained was the signal, and Adrian Cole's world would collapse under the very lights he adored. Silver Haven Chapel was packed, as if all of Boulder and Denver had poured in to witness the wedding Chloe believed was the happiest day of her life. White lights washed over the glittering gown, every seat filled with Adrian and Chloe's friends, family, co-workers, and dozens of phones live streaming. Everything fell silent as the officiant lifted his book and spoke. "If anyone has any objections, speak now or forever hold your peace." The moment the words dropped and every gaze turned toward the couple on the altar, the giant LED screen behind them suddenly went dark. A sharp beep followed, the unmistakable override tone. No one understood it except me. The screen lit back up with a single cold line, "System diagnostic, visual feed loading." The crowd gasped. Live stream numbers spiked instantly. The first image appeared, the forged POA with Grant's handwriting analysis report. 17 points of inconsistency, irrefutable. Whispers rippled across the pews. Chloe turned around, breath shaky, fingers tightening around her bouquet. Then came slide 2, the credit card statement showing nearly $90,000 in debt, with penalties and bank warnings. Slide 3, the BMW Series 7 repossession notice, vehicle repossession scheduled March 14th. Adrian's face drained, though he forced a calm tone. "This is fake. He's trying to destroy our wedding." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some phones zoomed in for TikTok, but that was only the opening act. The screen shifted to the first video. Melissa Pike appeared, time-stamped, clear, her voice steady. "My name is Melissa Pike. 4 years ago, Adrian Cole cost me my 2-bedroom condo. This is the clip of him telling me about his liquidity plan." Then the audio played, Adrian's voice. "We just need temporary liquidity. Once you sell your place, I can clear the debt. If you cooperate, our future will be fine." Screams, gasps, and stunned murmurs shot through the chapel. Adrian shouted, voice cracking, "She's lying! She's unstable!" But immediately the second video appeared. Rachel Dawes. Strong-eyed, unwavering. "I'm Rachel Dawes. Adrian Cole stole $140,000 from me using the exact words he's been saying to Chloe. If this ceremony continues, Chloe will be next. Someone sobbed in the right row. A man whispered, "My God, it's the same script." Chloe stepped back, color draining from her face. "Adrian, why are they saying the exact things you told me?" Adrian snapped, "They're conspiring. This is a smear campaign." At the height of the chaos, the chapel doors opened. I walked in. My coat still damp from the rain, a file in my hand. I didn't have to raise my voice. Stepping into the aisle was enough to silence the room. I looked toward the altar. "Caleb." In the tech booth, Caleb gave a silent nod. The final slide appeared. 4 prior victims. Pattern fraud. Confirmed Rachel. Dawes. Loss. 140,000. Melissa Pike. Condo forfeited Veronica. Restraining order Arizona. Unresolved case. I held up the file, my voice calm but cutting. "These are the 4 before." I stepped closer, eyes landing on Chloe, her face breaking like glass. "And Chloe is the 5th. You could feel the chapel hold its breath. Adrian lunged toward me, finger trembling. "You parasitic old man. You're ruining my life," I replied, without raising my tone. "No, you ruined your own." At that moment, from the back entrance, Melissa and Rachel stepped inside. Not just faces on a screen, but living witnesses. The entire room rose, phones up, recording, live streaming. Rachel spoke, voice like a blade. "Everything Mr. Mercer said is true." Melissa followed, steady, fearless. "He uses the same script, word for word. Chloe is just the next target." Adrian staggered back, pale as if blood had drained from his body. "You're all colluding to destroy me." I looked directly at him. "No, you exposed yourself." Lights shimmered across the wooden floor, flickering like a frantic heartbeat. Every phone was aimed at Adrian, not with admiration, but with the raw shock reserved for a con man caught in the act. Chloe stood in the middle of the aisle, trembling, but finally seeing the truth. And I, after months of being called controlling, paranoid, unstable, had finally pulled my daughter back from the edge. The front courtyard of Silverhaven Chapel had never seen chaos like this. Guests poured out through the main doors, whispers rolling in waves, phones lifted high to capture every second. A misting rain fell over the brick pavement, forming widening circles of water under the glare of headlights. Adrian stood in the middle of the crowd, breathing hard, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The pristine white suit that minutes earlier symbolized manufactured power now looked like a ridiculous shell, wrapped around a man fully exposed. He looked around, no paths left to run. A police siren shattered the air. A patrol car pulled up. Grant stepped out first, coat damp with rain, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Grant jerked his chin toward Adrian, his voice steady and cold. "Adrian Cole, you're under arrest on 3 primary charges: fraud, forgery, and identity theft." The crowd gasped. One officer stepped forward, pulling a folder from his breast pocket. "We have a warrant from the Boulder County Court. Hands behind your back, please." Adrian stepped back, shouting, "No, I didn't do anything. It's all fake. This is fabricated. I'm not going anywhere." He spun toward the parking lot, but Grant caught his wrist instantly. Adrian thrashed, screaming in front of every wedding guest, "Let go of me. You have no right. I'll sue every one of you." The officers moved in, restraining him as he fought and cursed. A sharp twist forced him forward, and he slammed face first onto the hood of the patrol car. The metallic thud echoed across the chapel courtyard, making several people flinch. The cuffs locked with a crisp click, cold as a verdict. Adrian was yanked upright, pale, hair soaked and plastered to his forehead. He screamed at me, voice cracking in panic. "Mercer, this is your fault. If it wasn't for you—" But no one believed him anymore. Chloe stood only a few steps away, frozen. Her face was chalk white, eyes rimmed red, shoulders trembling. As police escorted Adrian past her, she stared at him with a look shattered beyond heartbreak, because the truth was too bright to hide behind anymore. Melissa stepped forward, and lightly rested a hand on Chloe's shoulder, her voice low, warm, but unbearably sad. "Chloe, you're not the first person he told. You're the only one." Rachel stood beside her, honest and unwavering. "He used every one of those lines on us, word for word. You weren't the only one, and you wouldn't have been the last if today didn't happen." Chloe collapsed onto the wet pavement. A broken sob slipped out, small enough to break anyone's chest open, but loud enough for a father to hear across a lifetime. I stepped closer and knelt beside her. I didn't say anything. I just opened my arms. Chloe fell into my chest like the 6-year-old who once clung to me the day her mother died. Her sobs shook through my coat, hot and heavy with every month she'd spent drifting away. "Dad," a fractured whisper. I was wrong. I didn't listen. I trusted the wrong person. I'm so sorry." "Dad." I held her tight, steadying her in the soft rain and the fading siren in the distance. "It's all right, sweetheart. I'm here." And in that moment, beneath the chapel lights blurred by rain under the fading echo of metal cuffs being driven down the street, a truth stood clearer than anything else. Justice doesn't arrive by shouting. Justice arrives through truth, and truth always stands with those who refuse to give up. After the chaotic afternoon at Silverhaven Chapel, Chloe's world felt as if someone had sliced it cleanly in half with a cold blade. The peak of humiliation had torn apart the illusion Adrian had built around her, leaving behind a hollow space, one where truth forced her to face herself. In the first days that followed, Chloe barely spoke. Even simple questions like, "Are you okay?" took her a few seconds to process. But that silence was no longer the silence of defiance. It was the silence of someone waking up from a very long spell. I brought Chloe back to Lakewood, not as a father issuing instructions, but as someone who knew. Standing nearby was better than standing far away. The house that had held only one person for years now had the soft sound of her footsteps again. On the first morning, I heard her opening cupboards to look for a mug, heard the coffee machine hum, heard a small sigh, the kind you make when you're learning how to live again. I scheduled an appointment with a therapist I knew in Boulder. Chloe didn't resist. She sat in the passenger seat with her fingers intertwined, eyes fixed on the flat irons, as if trying to pull the air of Colorado into her lungs. After the session, she stepped out with red eyes but a lighter face, as if she'd finally set down part of the weight she had carried. I didn't ask what she talked about. Some things a father doesn't need to know, only to be there for. During that time, I handled the rest, the work a forensic accountant can do better than anyone. I organized the entire case file, the forged POA, the 4-victim pattern, the credit statements, the BMW lease history, and Grant's investigative conclusions. I printed everything, labeled each section, indexed it, and hand-delivered it to the Boulder County District Attorney's Office. The intake officer looked at the stack of documents that nearly filled the desk and said only one thing: "You've done half our work for us." Meanwhile, Melissa and Rachel filed civil suits. Their determination surprised even me. Melissa submitted a 27-page statement with archive messages. Rachel provided bank records, condo transfer documents, and 2 prior complaints that had never been processed. They were no longer victims. They had become active witnesses. Chloe knew but didn't intervene. She only said quietly, "Dad, I want to take responsibility for my part, but thank you for not leaving me alone in that mess." I placed a hand on her shoulder. Nothing more was necessary. The evenings in Lakewood became strange, yet peaceful. We didn't talk much about Adrian anymore. Instead, we talked about the classes Chloe wanted to return to, the research project she had left unfinished, the piano she had abandoned in a dorm storage closet years ago. Every sentence was a small step back toward herself. One dry afternoon, the wind from Sloan Lake drifted in, carrying the cool smell of water. We sat on the porch together. I made her chamomile tea, and I drank my usual black coffee. The birch tree out front rustled softly, its silver leaves trembling like they were whispering. Chloe leaned against the railing, her voice small. Dad, how are you not angry with me? I said things I should never have said. I stood by someone who destroyed everything. I looked toward the lake, where the fading sunlight stretched a gold line across the surface. Then I shared the sentence Linda left me, the one I held onto for 17 years until this exact moment. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's making room for light to come in. Chloe turned to me, her eyes trembling. She broke down, not the cry of despair, but the cry of someone finally releasing the burden that had pressed on her chest for months. I handed her a tissue and looked up at the sky. The clouds drifted slow. The wind had softened. No more handcuffs. No more shouting in a chapel. No more suffocating confrontation. Just two people, a father and a daughter, trying to learn how to trust each other again after the truth stripped everything bare. The wounds remained, but wounds can be the very place where light begins to enter. The maple wood table sitting in the middle of my garage has aged a lot compared to 17 years ago. The surface is darker now, and the tiny scratches Chloe made as a child while sharpening pencils are still there. The day Linda died, I placed my hand on that wood and swore I would protect everything left of our small family, like a marker reminding me I still had something to guard. This morning I gently laid a cloth on the floor, pulled the table into the sunlight. Chloe stood behind me, holding a cup of hot tea, her face much softer than the days she spent piecing her heart back together. She looked at the table for a long moment, as if facing her own childhood. I began sanding off the old varnish. The warm, slightly sweet scent of maple filled the garage, identical to the smell back when Chloe was 8, sitting at the table with milk cream still on her lips, telling me about her 6th grade group project. Each pass of the sandpaper felt like time being gently erased, making room for a new beginning. Chloe leaned down and placed a photo on the table, the picture of Linda holding her at age 3, their blonde hair tangled together under the Lakewood sunlight. Chloe's voice trembled but stayed steady. I almost let a stranger destroy what Mom left behind. I stopped, looking at her for a long moment. She didn't need to say Adrian's name. His shadow was already behind us. But justice isn't just emotion. It has to be recorded. Last week, the Boulder County Court held the first hearing. Adrian was sentenced to 8 years for 3 primary charges: fraud, identity theft, and forgery. The financial penalties attached ensure he will never rise again using the same methods. He was placed on the financial predators list, losing the right to access any controlled assets in the future. The victims, Rachel, Melissa, and a woman in Arizona, received compensation through civil judgment. And the condo in Boulder? Ownership returned to the Mercer Family Trust. The title company personally apologized for not catching the forged POA signature. They said one sentence I'll never forget. Mr. Mercer, some people operate like professionals, but you're more professional than they are. I went back to the table, sanding another layer. Chloe stood with her arms folded, quietly watching. She didn't cry. She just looked, like someone learning how to appreciate things she once took for granted. I placed my hand on the wood and spoke slowly, each word deliberate. Justice isn't always about putting someone in handcuffs. Sometimes justice is bringing your child back to where they truly belong. Chloe nodded softly, then rested her head on my shoulder. A simple moment, but strong enough to seal the cracks we had walked through. Outside the porch, the afternoon light fell across Lakewood like a shimmering mirror. The water lapped softly against the shore, barely audible, like the heartbeat of someone who survived a close call. Chloe whispered, "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me." I placed my hand on her hair and answered, "I never will, and neither will Linda." The two of us stood there, looking at the lake shining like a new promise. And if you've listened this far, thank you for spending time on the story of a father who used nothing but truth to keep hold of what mattered most. If you want to follow more journeys where justice stays quiet but always precise, I warmly invite you to stay. So the next stories find exactly the people who need a little light on their hardest days.